So good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this policy debate. My name is Silvia Carta, and I'm a policy analyst at the European Policy Center. And I'm very, very pleased to welcome you all today on behalf of the EPC and of the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. So this event is an occasion to present the discussion paper resulting from a one-year project, which has been jointly led by the EPC and CAS, which is entitled Future-Proofing Resettlement Policies, Next Steps for Resettlement and Community Sponsorship in the EU. The paper is co-authored by myself, together with Helena Hahn, junior policy analyst at the EPC, and Olivia Sundberg-Dietz, who is a former policy analyst at the EPC and now policy and advocacy advisor at the International Rescue Committee. In case not yet seen, we will post a link to the publication in the chat. But before starting with the panel debates, I would also like to say a few words on why this event is particularly timely. So first of all, throughout the past year, there has been really an unprecedented momentum on resettlement at the EU level, and the present European Commission has showcased its eagerness to lead on resettlement, also hosting a high-level resettlement forum in July. And in parallel, there has been growing interest on complementary pathways, including community sponsorship. So you know that recent events, and in particular the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, have also highlighted a need to expand durable solutions for all the forcibly displaced people worldwide, and to show solidarity to the countries that are hosting them. So in October, the European Commission organized a second high-level resettlement forum, this time in response to the Afghan crisis, aimed at achieving additional pledges in terms of resettlement, but also at extending opportunities for sponsorship and other legal pathways. And however, in the past few months, we have seen that the attention and also the commitment towards resettlement and complementary pathways have been subject to more fluctuations, in particular in light of recent events such as the humanitarian crisis at the border with Belarus. So the overall pledges already presented by member states for 2022 remain far from the expectations. They're around, I think, 20,000 pledges, but some positive signs are coming from member states. For example, the coalition agreement in Germany reaffirms the commitment of on resettlement, as well as Italy, that has launched a new humanitarian corridors program for up to 2,000 Afghans. So against this background, today's discussion is not just an opportunity to present our paper, but also an occasion to reflect on these recent developments and to engage in a forward-looking debate on legal pathways, resettlement, and community sponsorship. So first of all, we will listen to a presentation of the paper's main findings and recommendations that will be delivered by Helena Hahn. And this will be followed by a panel debate with our guests that I'm very, very happy to welcome today. So first of all, we will have Lina Dupont, member of the European Parliament in the European People's Party and also member of the Libe Committee. Then we will have Laura Curado, head of the Policy Coordination and Interinstitutional Relations Unit at DG Home. Then David Manicom, Special Advisor on Resettlement and Complementary Pathways at UNHCR. And last but not least, Giulio Di Blasi, Europe Director at the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative. So welcome to you all. And before I start, I am very pleased to hand over to our partners in this project, and in particular to Dr. Ardi Ostri, who is the head of the European office at the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. So Dr. Ostri, the floor is yours for some introductory remarks.
Thank you, Silvia. Dear speakers, participants, and dear colleagues, I'm delighted to extend to all of you a warm welcome on behalf of the European office of the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung on the occasion of this launch event and policy dialogue, as you already heard from Silvia on the occasion of our publication, Future-Proofing Resettlement Policies, Next Steps Forward, Resettlement and Community Sponsorship in the EU. Today's event marks also the end of the joint CAS-EPC project, Future-Proofing EU Resettlement Policies, that has accompanied us throughout this year. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank our colleagues from the EPC and my colleagues from CAS European Office, and all those who were involved in these excellent and competent work and final results. We are very pleased with the results of the project and look forward to today's event, where we will discuss how to implement the key findings of the study in order to help the European Union and its member states to strengthen their efforts on resettlement and community sponsorship. Despite all obstacles, Europe plays a crucial role to strengthen resettlement plans and policies. Yet, how can the EU scale up its level of ambition in setting resettlement targets in the coming years? And will the present attention around resettlement be strong enough to mobilize member states to scale up resettlement and community sponsorship in a way that is proportionate to global needs? The European Office of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung and the European Policy Center attach high importance to an open exchange with experts, and our event today offers a framework to discuss all these questions on the table. Dear speakers and participants, your expertise and experience are an integral part of our project, and we look forward to your inputs. And I would like to warmly welcome our high-ranking panelists, Lena Dupont, Laura Corrado, David Manicam, and Giulio Di Blasi. Thank you very much for being here with us today to discuss the future of resettlement. I look forward to an interactive discussion and will now hand over again to Silvia Carta of the EPC. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you for these very comprehensive remarks and also for the very good cooperation. And now just some final housekeeping rules before we start with the presentations. So first of all, we really count on your questions throughout the event. You can already post them in the Q&A box, and you will also have the possibility to come in by raising your hand later. Finally, I just wanted to mention that this is a public event and that it will be recorded and available on YouTube. But before moving to our panel discussion, we wanted to give you some insights of the findings and the key recommendations of our discussion paper. So I'm happy to hand over to my colleague, Elena Hahn, for a 5 to 6 minutes presentation. Thanks a lot, Elena.
Thanks so much, Silvia, and a warm welcome also from my end to everyone who has joined today's event. So against the background of the manifold challenges mentioned in the introduction, I'm very pleased to now provide you with a brief overview of the research we conducted over the past year. The project began at a time when the future of resettlement and the growth of complementary pathways was uncertain, notably due to the pandemic. The world now looks slightly different, even as the challenges to implementing and scaling up resettlement and community sponsorship remain. The past months have seen several instances where there was clear momentum for resettlement and sponsorship to grow, including vocal pushes by the European Commission for member states to make ambitious pledges and to launch community sponsorship schemes. Member states, meanwhile, have also showcased creative thinking in addressing the difficult circumstances they faced. Yet, questions remain as to how this momentum can be sustained going forward. In our paper, we therefore looked at 3 key issues. 1, how to boost resettlement commitments by EU member states. 2, how to maximize the protection aspects of resettlement in relations with third countries. And finally, how to support the growth of community sponsorship initiatives, including through the European approach to sponsorship introduced by the Commission in the new Pact on Migration and Asylum last year. We began by detailing the main challenges in each of these areas, and I'd like to highlight some of the common challenges we were able to identify. These include, on the one hand, fluctuations and systemic shocks such as the pandemic, or also outbreaks of violence and conflict that make it difficult for resettlement actors and member states to carry out resettlement operations, as well as to ensure continued arrivals. Second, capacity constraints, for instance, when it comes to national reception systems being oversaturated or there being a lack of available housing, but also funding constraints for key actors involved in resettlement, such as UNHCR or IOM. Thirdly, there are also questions of how to move from piloting to longer-term programs in the case of community sponsorship, or the absence of multi-annual planning cycles in the case of resettlement programs. This also relates to the 4th point, namely the importance of sustaining financial investment, both on the EU level as well as by member states. And finally, we also saw the issue of lacking political willingness to support the growth of legal pathways as a whole and across the EU, but also more specifically to invest truly in scaling up resettlement or launching sponsorship schemes or other complementary pathway programs. Now, based on these challenges, we devised a series of recommendations on what the EU and member states should do to pave the way for a more future-proof approach to resettlement and community sponsorship. On the one hand, this involves the European Commission continuing to encourage and support member states to create the right conditions to scale up resettlement. This means in particular tackling the capacity constraints I mentioned earlier, but also building political support across all levels. Secondly, it will be important for the Commission to continue fostering knowledge exchange as well as peer learning between member states but also to create a more inclusive dialogue on future activities going forward. And this is important because it would be a recognition of civil societies, cities and municipalities, host communities, and sponsorship groups' important and crucial role in receiving and helping newcomers to integrate. Thirdly, we recommend that the European Commission offer diverse but also tighter-knit funding opportunities under the Multi-Annual Financial Framework 2021 to 27, such that there is, for instance, more coherence between funding provided under the AMIF and longer-term integration funds such as the European Social Fund Plus or the ERDF. Fourthly, it will be important to establish a flexible yet also clearer definition of community sponsorship, including on its additionality to resettlement efforts, in order to more firmly embed it in the EU policy landscape. This should likewise also be an inclusive process involving the European Commission, the European Parliament, EU agencies, member states, but also civil society organizations and international organizations. And finally, we found that it will be absolutely important to place protection principles at the core of future efforts. This is not only key in order to preserve resettlement's vital role as a durable solution to those in need, but also to boost the EU's credibility as an actor that is increasingly driving global resettlement and sponsorship efforts. Now, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I look forward likewise to hearing what our speakers have to say and would hand over back to Silvia. Silvia, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Elena, and thanks for condensing such a comprehensive presentation and almost the full paper in only 5 minutes. And Elena, of course, will be back in the Q&A in case there are any questions on the presentation or on the paper. So we will now move to the panel discussion with our experts, who will walk us through some different aspects of the debate around resettlement and community sponsorship in the EU. I would ask you all to limit your input statements to 5 minutes maximum, so to leave enough space for the interactive Q&A with the public, but you will all have the chance to add some further remarks in the final part of the event. So we will start with Mrs. Lina Dupont, member of the European Parliament in the Libya Committee. Mrs. Dupont, we're really looking forward to your views on the future of the EU resettlement policies and on the opportunities to advance the Union Resettlement Framework from your perspective as an MEP. The floor is yours for 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, dear Ms. Carter, and thanks to all panelists for joining this debate. Thanks to the CAS for organizing, thanks to the EPC for or at least for both for co-organizing this very important event. I think as we had seen recently, just a couple of weeks or a few months ago, when the Afghanistan crisis, let's say, hit us, hit at first the Afghanistan people, but of course had repercussions here for Europe as well. We saw how fast we need to react in terms of crisis, and this, of course, is also a question when it comes to the future of resettlement policies. So it's high time for Europe to take up this discussion and even try to, let's say, put it into a more structural way than we probably did so far. You're all well aware that there was this kind of framework proposed in 2016, and since then it hasn't moved any far. Since 2018, it's stuck in, especially in the Council, but also here in the Parliament. I would say that with the changing majorities we probably have, and we're still facing here in the Parliament, it might be even more difficult to reach an agreement if anyone ever picks up the topic as a legislative proposal again. Nevertheless, as you already mentioned also in your introductory remarks, it's a very important discussion. It's a very important topic we are about to have today, because the protection needs worldwide are on the rise for different reasons. And I would say, as a first introductory remarks from my side, I think the biggest question were already posed not only by the paper, but also by the first introductory remarks by the panelists. And I would pick up a quote from Dr. Ostry in this regard, that we do have good targets, but it's even more important that we have actual places. So pledging things is one thing, upholding these pledges and putting them into reality is one of the bottlenecks we still have. And we all know that the pandemic didn't make it any easier to fulfill these pledges. And unfortunately, most of the member states somehow almost completely refrained from their pledges they had made. So we came to the very almost cynical situation that we had the first ever high pledges or numbers of pledges within the European Union, but in reality, basically only a small number of them have been actually put into practice. So this is, I think, one of the key major findings that we need to discuss around that. And I would say, I would like to group that a bit, let's say, in a two aim or two goal way in this regard. So how to motivate those who already pledge their places to keep their motivation, not only their motivation, but also their practical support to have that up. And how to include those who hasn't done much so far. And I think there we need, let's say, a two-way strategy. Also, of course, when it comes to funding and so on and so forth. But I think addressing the first group of member states within the European Union, we can do a lot by structural support when it comes to funding, to sharing of knowledge and best practices, but also making use of the new asylum agency, as we had just given her the broader mandate than before. This is as well true for those whom we would like to motivate to take even more responsibility when it comes to resettlement places. But here, I think we also need to address some concerns, or even, let's say, I'm not quite sure how to put it in the right word, but let's put it in the positive way. We need to see how to positively incentivize them to take part in resettlement pledges at all. This is, of course, also a question of funding. Is of course also a question of best practice exchange and structural support. But I would also here add that it's also a question of the political dimension these member states face, which needs to be taken into account. And there we unfortunately then enter into the sometimes ugly debate on asylum and migration as a whole in this regard. But I think if we do want to motivate them to take part in that and to keep up the promise that Europe made, not only to other member states worldwide, but also to those mostly affected by the need for resettlement places and for protection aims, I think it is part of the discussion that we need to do. It was already complicated before the pandemic. We will, of course, have to, let's say, revive our efforts in the end. There are some answers in the current Pact on migration, on asylum and migration, when it comes to the external dimension, especially when we're talking about third country cooperation. And here, although not part of the package, there is, of course, also a link to the question of legal migration and complementary pathways. Because I saw the sign, it's only 1 minute, thanks for that. I would just also then probably like to raise a question, which I would happily to discuss with you as well, is the question of preparedness and foresight. There is something in there also in the package, but of course, especially when it comes to resettlement place and the question of biannually planning as in this regard, we also have to have some kind of better preparedness and foresight when it comes to the crisis and the countries that should be taken into account on that. And I think the biggest question into the very end is how do we foster cooperation worldwide with even more actors? Probably it was the biggest discussion we also had in the Global Compact in 2019 in Geneva, when luckily the United States turned back as an actor again. Canada as well, but nevertheless, we know that we still do not address the protection needs that are there worldwide. So this is my first, let's say, my first remarks, and I'm really looking forward for the discussion with you.
Many thanks also for keeping the time, but especially for being so comprehensive. You touched upon a number of very key questions, from implementation to, of course, the need to incentivize member states that are engaged in resettlement at different levels, and of course, also the cooperation worldwide, which is a very important point that I hope will also be reflected in the discussion later. But now we can move to our second speaker, so Laura Corrado from DG Home. You have a very, very vast experience working on legal pathways in the European Commission, and we would, of course, be happy to hear your insights on how the Commission plans to bring resettlement and community sponsorship forward, also in light of the recent high-level fora. So the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Yes, thanks very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Resettlement and community sponsorship and legal pathways are topics that I'm always glad to discuss, even if I am now in a more, let's say, horizontal perspective and position. But I think this remains policies at the heart of the Commission asylum and migration policy in general. And this is also a priority for our commissioner. As you know, since the beginning of her mandate, she really pushed very much on the political level for promoting and increasing resettlement and legal pathways in general, as well as for developing community sponsorship. I think this is even more important now that indeed we seem to go from crisis to crisis, some closer to the EU borders, some others less, but all with a certain impact. And I'm not saying this in a way responding to one of your arguments about the dichotomy between resettlement and territorial asylum. I don't think this is a contradiction or a dichotomy at all. At least this is not my vision. But I think in a way that the world is so unstable, so unpredictable that we have a duty to work even more to promote safe, predictable legal pathways for people in need of protection. So. And I think as the EU, we have done it pretty well, I would say. I will not repeat everything you explained very well, very much in details in the paper, maybe just a few highlights or a few things that I would like to mention in particular. We have developed since the 2015 initial EU scheme, we have over 81,000 resettled people. Now, this is not huge compared to the global needs, I know, but it showed a progression in the commitments from the EU and from the member states. And I would also tend to disagree on the fact that the impact of COVID totally disrupted the resettlement operations. Of course, it had an impact, especially at the beginning. But as of October 2021, because we have extended, of course, the implementation period for member states, 65% of the pledges were implemented, which is a lot. And we have encouraged member states also to use innovative means, and EASO has supported them, like remote handling of files, of applications. So it's not that member states, there are a few that have almost not stopped their operation. So I think overall the picture I see is not really negative. It's more positive than it might seem. We have also worked very much on different levels, not only on resettlement, but as you also explained, on the complementary pathways, particularly for students and for labor reasons. And this is also something quite new from a European perspective. And we have really pushed it through networking, cooperation. We have really convened member states and other actors in cooperation with other actors to see how to develop that, and we provide the funding underpinning this. And of course, the community sponsorship, this is something that when I took over the resettlement in, I think, 2019, we had done a study, EASO had started to work on it, but we didn't really have a lot of examples in the EU, in the member states. We had a bright example of Canada, as usual, to take inspiration from. But there was a lot of bottom-up initiatives, and we really discovered a lot of activity in several member states, from NGOs, faith-based organizations, and other organizations, and of course, GRSI. I will not forget mentioning Giulio, and many other that were really developing this. And we have tried to put everything together and to also push member states to work with all these actors on the ground. We have provided funding as well, direct funding through different calls that have funded projects, not only on community sponsorship and resettlement, but then also on complementary pathways with a community sponsorship component. And we are planning to do that also in the future, to continue this. And all this, of course, on top of the incentive payments, the lump sums that we are providing to member states for more traditional resettlement, and with the new Asylum and Migration and Integration Fund for humanitarian admission as well. And of course, I think another element that I want to mention in terms of funding the integration, as you say in the paper, this is an essential element. And as I've said before, the community sponsorship is the perfect link between the admission of people in needs through resettlement, complementary pathways, and integration. So this is why we have really wanted to push this very much and really strengthen this link and convince member states of the added value of this. Then maybe on the more political international level, indeed, you recalled the initiatives of Commissioner Johansson, so the high-level resettlement forum in July, and there it was really to step up, to convene together with the big other actors on resettlement, the Canada, and of course also now the US, which is back to the resettlement arena, but also UNHCR, of course, and other organizations. Really to see how to work together, to cooperate, to step up resettlement, how to really ensure that we can have leadership and be an example for other actors in the world. So I think this was really important. We have, again, done this also when it comes to the situation in Afghanistan. In October, there was this high-level forum where the commissioner, together with her representative, took the lead. And I have to say that this is bearing some fruit. I cannot give you any scoop. I'm sorry, I cannot disclose figures today. But I can tell you that member states have been very responsive to our call for pledges for Afghans at risk, on top of the traditional priorities that we had identified in July in line with the UNHCR assessment. So, and we have been securing funding for that. So this is a very positive development. I think we will give publicly the figures and very soon. So maybe just one last word. I know I'm beyond the time, but on the resettlement framework. Now, as Ms. Dupont has already said, this is blocked since several years because not so much, I would say, for divergences now in the Council or Parliament. There was a political agreement. Of course, majorities have possibly changed, but it's more because it's linked to the other elements of the Migration Pact and Asylum. And as long as we don't solve that, we don't find a magic balance between all the elements of the pact, resettlement cannot be unblocked, unfortunately. But we are working on that as well. This is another topic for another seminar about how to go forward on the pact. But I think that what we have done in this past year has shown that we can do many things and we can do a lot even without having a framework. I'm not saying it's not important, it will give more predictability and stability, but I think this does not prevent us from doing many things. And I think that I can say the Commission commitment is to continue that in the next years. And thank you for your recommendations and suggestions. Thank you.
Many thanks to you for your insights. And of course, even if you won't get any scoops on the numbers, these were extremely interesting and also comprehensive. And hopefully we can quickly get back to some of the points in the Q&A. And now I would like to move to our first speaker. So David Manicum, advisor on resettlement and complementary pathways at UNHCR, who also has a very long-standing experience on resettlement and all aspects relating to complementary pathways. So now we would really welcome to hear about the UNHCR's perspective on the EU resettlement ambitions. Over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me clearly? It's so nice to follow Laura. Laura, I hope you are feeling better soon. We miss you. I think you should come back to the resettlement world. It's good to be here. I was going to point out the part of the report I particularly liked, but I realized when I did that took 7 minutes and I only have 5. So I'm not going to do that. I'll just say generally it's an excellent report. I think all readers will learn something and be energized by it. I think that's the main thing. It's very concrete, it's very specific. It gives us very practical ways forward. I'm going to make 5 points, so hopefully 1 minute each. I don't know if any one person could be said to represent UNHCR's point of view, but I think it's consistent with UNHCR's point of view. I'll try to be a little bit provocative. Resettlement. So it's essential to expand it. Our credibility as a global community Given the Global Compact, given the New York Declaration, given the 3-year strategy, we must have expansion, and that expansion cannot come only from one country, the United States. It's good to see Canada's program continuing to grow and so forth, but we need growth in Europe. Europe wants to be a global leader. I would suggest, to be a bit provocative, that if Europe wants to be a global leader in this area, there has to be resettlement numbers of at least 50% per capita of what North America does. To do less than half, I don't think makes Europe a global leader. What does that mean in principle? The current targets of around 30,000 represents probably 7,000 to 8,000 families. That's one family in a city of 60,000. So to double that means 2 families in a city of 60,000. I do not believe that Europe's integrative capacities, running good, well-designed programs embedded in local communities, cannot integrate 2 families each year into a city of 60,000. Or to put it another way, in a small town of 10,000, 1 family every 3 years. I think that is perfectly doable and does not strain integration capacity in any way, shape, or form. Second point, I think it's so important to work on the delinking of resettlement integration capacity from asylum system capacities. We cannot do, and this is the one really important point the report makes, we cannot move from ad hoc pledging exercises to multi-annual joint resettlement pledges, which I think is the most fundamental change needed. It will reap many, many benefits of efficiency and planning and credibility and program design if we can move to the gradual step-by-step increase of multi-year planning. It's been very hard to do if many European countries do not have separate budgetary and resource structures for the integration of resettled refugees from asylum claimants. Third point I'd like to make, community sponsorship programs. We're very excited and pleased that the landscape here has changed. 5 years ago when we started on this work, I was a skeptical enthusiast. I'm a strong, strong believer in community sponsorship. No one who is involved with refugees in your community who are being sponsored can fail to be energized by those programs. But I was skeptical we could move into Europe, and I was wrong. We've done so. The Commission's been very helpful, but leaders such as the UK and Ireland and Germany have shown the way. These programs need to be designed to scale up. We need to no longer have miniature pilots that sunset after 3 years and then are evaluated. Funding mechanisms should strongly encourage cautious but real growth built in as the design of the program. Yes, they should be national specific and even city specific in their design. They should not be one size fits all. They need to be sensitive to local, legal, and other frameworks and the nature of communities. But there are a number of principles which can be embedded to make sure that they meet our goals. They need to responsibilize community and private actors in a meaningful way to build different types of advocates, people who are energetic, proactive advocates. I think there needs to be ambitious public campaigns in each country to excite the public, co-run by government and civil society networks with a range of local actors. Let's get our new and wonderful community sponsorship programs out from under the barrel or under the bushel, whatever the right phrase is, and get them out there as exciting projects which countries and communities are proud of. They need to engage, however they're designed, they need to engage all of city governments, subnational governments, business leaders and employers who become active, reaching out to help employ and integrate refugees into their communities, business leaders, sports networks, and faith-based networks. Fourth point I'd like to make. With regard to additional funding proposals using new and existing envelopes within the EU structure, where I'm not sufficiently expert to get much deeper than that, I would encourage us to look at funding complementary pathways in education and labor with numerical targets, with a primary condition that they are clearly additional to that country's resettlement program. Complementary pathways which cannibalize resettlement programs will never get the broad support we need across the board, including from UNHCR. Particularly in education, using innovative funding mechanisms prepared jointly by states and business leaders. At this moment, there is a call going on, which I wish I could listen to at the same time, which is gathering together philanthropic foundations from across Europe, organized by the Global Network on Education Pathways and Open Societies Foundation to look at innovative funding mechanisms in education. And in the education sphere, which is relatively not politically controversial, funding mechanisms are the crucial enabler, including innovative microloans and so forth. And I would encourage the EU and its member states to look at how to fund whole of society, third country solutions networks at the city level. Third country solution networks for all of resettlement, community sponsorship, labor, family unification, and education pathways that engage the community collectively, build a structure, it's not expensive to do so, that talks across the community to build robust community engagement and integrative forces, which involve the police, healthcare, education, employers, chambers of commerce, and so forth. Lastly, as I run out of time, regularize the global high-level forum instigated by Commissioner Johansson. Third country solutions need senior level political engagement in a structured and regular way. There's lots of models you could look at. You could have ministers responsible meet once a year with their deputy ministers meeting also every 6 months. For example, we don't need a big new administrative overhead and structure, but we need to have policymakers and decision makers in the same room on a regular basis at senior levels. Thanks very much.
Thanks to you, and also thanks a lot for wrapping up in time and for these very, very comprehensive remarks again. I was really impressed by the numbers you mentioned in the beginning, which are very, very striking when you hear them, but also by all of these recommendations that, of course, expand even further from what we are discussing, so resettlement and community sponsorship, but also look at additional pathways, which are probably some very interesting ideas for the future discussion. But now, as I said before, last but not least, we have Giulio Di Blasi, Director for Europe of the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative, and again, a person with a lot of experience on the EU migration policy, but also complementary pathways, community sponsorship, and resettlement. So over to you, Giulio, for 5 minutes.
Thanks so much, Silvia. And first of all, just to build on David's comment, congratulations for a great report. Really, really well done. I said it in the private pre-meeting. I'm happy to reiterate it here. I think it's really, really amazing work you've been putting together at EPC. You just forgot one recommendation that I want to reiterate, which is Laura Corrado needs to be back in her position on legal migration. That is missing in the recommendations. I would appreciate that being added. Jokes aside, but not so much. I wanted to flag today, I'll be speaking much beyond my current role at the GRSI and think about resettlement more broadly. And I would start to say that we are currently living at the moment of incredible change and opportunity in the resettlement space, driven by two factors, fundamentally, from my perspective. The first one and oldest one by now is COVID, which has changed the way we think about people movement globally. And this forced us to rethink and innovate the way we process the movement of people. The second one, which is much more recent, is Afghanistan, which has created a whole new set of challenges to the global resettlement system writ large. And I say writ large because not all of Afghans would fall under the resettlement traditional definition, but has definitely created a need to be fast, responsive, and for the first time in a lot of in a long period, actually created incredible ties with the societies of destination. So many persons in countries of destination, from Europe to North America to Australia, are directly interested and engaged in supporting Afghans because they have been working shoulder to shoulder with them in the past 20 years. And this includes new constituencies like veterans or universities or others that have been working together with Afghans in the past and that want to provide an helping hand, which creates a new incredible opportunity to develop ties that can be turned into welcoming opportunities. So these two drivers are coming together at the same time. And I would now classify 4 key, let's say, next steps that I see. And I tried, as always, to use always the same initial letter, and it's D for today. So I would say the key drivers for me are diversification, decentralization, digitalization, and actually definition. And I will start with the last. Definition, and I think you picked this up very well in your paper. A lot of terms in the resettlement space are incredibly blurred. Partly this includes community sponsorship, but it goes all the way up to the definition of resettlement in itself. UNHCR does an amazing work in constantly trying to update and change the definitions in order to meet the reality. But actually the reality is moving faster than definitions, and working around definition is going to be incredibly helpful on concepts like additionality, complementarity, community sponsorship, and others, in order to allow everyone to find common ground and better understand what everyone else is speaking about. So definition, that's one. The second one is diversification, and that's also picked up in your report. I think that's what's David night and day thoughts. How do we diversify pathways to protection? How do we make them accessible, diverse, to a very large, wide group of persons who are in need, who cannot enter into the traditional resettlement pathway and need other solutions to move? This includes labor pathways, this includes education pathways, but I also want to flag here strongly family pathways. We know there is a strong legal framework around family reunification in the European Union. We also know that family reunification is a very slow process. And we also know that the definition of family in the family reunification is very strict and specific, and actually is not the way refugees arriving into Europe identify as family. So I would also want to flag family as a very important pathway that can be developed and that can actually be an important driver for community sponsorship itself. If you look at Canada, it's a large part and portion of community groups are self-initiated by refugees who have been arriving and support the formation of a group in order to reunite with another family member who's going to join them. And this, of course, has incredible potential, both in order to grow community sponsorship, but also to offer better integration prospects for both the person that has already been arriving and the future newcomers. So diversification, definition. The third one is decentralization. Also here, I want to commend the report in flagging the role of local authorities and communities. I'm thinking here of universities, I'm thinking here of employers, others who are ready and have been expressing for a long time the availability and willingness to join global resettlement efforts and host refugees. And the role of governments, and frankly, the European Union, is to enable them to do so. We need to start thinking of the role of the state in this space, not so much as an owner of the space, but as an enabler of the incredible amount of willingness and enthusiasm that exists across society to welcome newcomers. So that's at the core of what I'm doing at the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative, of course, but it applies really across pathways. And if we work around this enabling, also the questions around additionality and numbers and scalability are going to change. If we enable that solidarity to be activated, we can grow numbers, we can grow them very fast, we can decentralize hard problems like housing, for instance, because it's not going to be all landing in the same reception centers. And to do so, we need to create legal frameworks, and we need to secure sustainable financing. David was pointing at the incredible enthusiasm that exists around the education pathways. And what's the main challenge everybody continues to say and flag? Funding. How do we secure sustainable funding for education pathways? There's no shortage of places, there's no shortage of enthusiasm, there's no shortage of will. Last but not least, digitalization. It's pretty obvious to say how COVID has accelerated the digitalization process. Our resettlement systems writ large, including both resettlement and complementary pathways, are still very slow. They are not interoperable. There is not very much interoperability between the different pathways. Persons are registered into different frameworks. There is an incredible potential to pursue a deliberate digitalization strategy in the resettlement field so that we can make the processing of cases more efficient, reduce the need for actual travel of officials in order to conduct interviews, which has been a significant bottleneck during COVID times, but also in order to amplify refugee self-agency. And I'm thinking here of the incredible experience of the education corridors in Italy, where it's refugees themselves that apply for a program. And I think it's pretty unique that for once, it's not others that identify those that need to enter into a program, but there is agency provided to refugees to actually apply for a program that they want to join and that they believe have the skills to be able to join. So these are my 4 streams for a future-proof resettlement policy. I would just close by saying this opportunity and this time is also ripe for new international cooperation. And Laura has flagged this before. Europe has already taken a very important leadership role last year in convening at ministerial level coalition of states coming together in order to pursue this agenda. The rejoining of the United States into this fold is even increasing the opportunities for international cooperation and leadership. So I'm really hopeful that the European Union can really act as an enabler of the future resettlement policy and also as a very important leader of a large, strong coalition of states that can lead us forward for the next 20 years.
Thank you very much. Again, very insightful, very forward-looking as well. So thanks again to you and to all the speakers for your initial inputs. And now I think, and I'm very happy that we kept the time straight because we have 45 minutes for a discussion with the audience. I just wanted to flag that Laura Corrado will need to leave us after the first round of questions. So please do not hesitate to already share your questions, especially if they are directed to her. We already have something in the Q&A, and thanks a lot for that. However, we will have another policy officer of the Commission in the audience who will also try to reply to questions in writing, if possible, while Laura Corrado will leave us in a couple of minutes. So if that is okay for everyone, I will start taking some initial questions, maybe 2 or 3 at a time. So as I already mentioned, do not hesitate to use the Q&A box, but you can also raise your hand and we will be happy to unmute you and to allow you to ask your questions directly if you wish to do so. So I will call your name and then somebody from the events team will then unmute you. So remember just to introduce yourselves and of course to be brief, so to give us the opportunity to take as many questions as possible. So again, if that is okay to everyone, I will ask the first round of questions and then potentially go to Laura for her first replies so that she can disconnect right after and then move to the other speakers that will be with us until the end. So I see already quite a lot in the Q&A. So I will start with 3 questions to begin with. The first one from Naomi Alboim, who asks about student and labor pathways, so something that has been already introduced in the discussion. And she's asking what safeguards are put in place to ensure that these pathways, so for student and labor migration, also provide durable solutions, for example, permanent residence. Then we also have another question from Natalie Welfens. She thanks you all for the presentations and she asks you to also reflect about the use attempts to link resettlement to migration management and border control. So for example, in the framework's proposal to prioritize regions that cooperate on border control and return, or to deprioritize people who try to enter the EU irregularly. And she also asks about your viewpoint on the use of integration potential as a selection criteria on resettlement and humanitarian admission. So this was already, I think, quite comprehensive. Maybe I can also come in with a moderator question, since I've heard that this was a point that you all touched upon, and also with different perspective. And I mean, let's say the COVID-related situation, because I feel that you have different, potentially different insights to provide. And I was in particular wondering, Laura, you mentioned very rightly that some member states managed to continue admitting people even in very low numbers throughout 2020 and 2021. And I was wondering whether you could also elaborate a bit on this, for example, innovative methods that can be used, but also to make sure that these methods are not abused so that they do not pose risks also for the applicants. And in general, of course, for the other speakers later, in case you want to come in and elaborate a bit more on the future after COVID. But Laura, I will now come to you and then we will have time for, of course, other questions.
Thanks very much. Well, I will try to give you, yes, my feedback and sometimes my personal views on some of this. On the students and labor pathways, well, I think there are different models that we have seen in the different projects across member states. So the discussion we have had with the member states have shown that I think the student pathways are rather uncontroversial or less controversial than the labor pathways, I have to say. And there have been discussions also about how does this interact then with the rules on labor admission, for example, and the sustainability as well. So what we have always told member states, in any case, there are some of these questions that will have to be elaborated further, and also in the light of the acquis that we have, the legislation at EU level, and so on. But I think one thing that we made very clear, and no member state contested that people that are admitted as students and or through labor pathways, if they're in need of protection, they do remain in need of protection. So they might come, and here the practices are different with different type of visa, even a student visa. But then if they have a right to asylum, to protection, they will have this right, whatever, the visa has expired or not. And same for labor. So people might well prefer, if then they are in an integration parcours, I would say that, that they will never ask for a formal refugee status. If they then integrate, they may acquire citizenship and so on. So it's not, I would say, compulsory to prescribe, okay, you need to give this visa, this type of permit. But it is clear that indeed, also in a perspective of, yes, sustainability, you admit people also with a longer term perspective, people will never lose their right to protection. So they can also have then an asylum, refugee status or protection, even if they have come with a student visa. This is to give them an extra opportunity also to see they have also skills, they have talents, they want to learn. And so it's not something that takes away their right to protection, I would say. And this I think it's clear to all member states. Then I think there are a lot of things that will have to be further discussed in practice on how this can work. And we have just started, especially on the labor pathways. I think there is more to discuss. Yes, on resettlement as a migration management tool, but this is my personal opinion. I don't think it's a good idea also, and that it has not been proved to be very effective. Now, I will not deny that there is such element, for example, in the Turkey statement, as you mentioned. But I would also want to say that in practice, we have not implemented this. We have resettled many more people than ever returned to Turkey. So yes, it exists as principle in some of our EU policy documents. But I would say that in practice, protection reasons have prevailed when we thought that there were really needs for a certain region. So I would say I don't think this is effective, and I don't know if we will ever be seriously implementing this in such a way. But this is, as I said, is my personal opinion. Well, on the integration potential, I think this, I wouldn't, cannot be a criteria as such. Of course, certainly not for vulnerable people, for resettlement. We have then to enable the integration and put in place all the necessary conditions when the people are admitted. It is clear that when we talk about complementary pathways for students or labor, there is a selection that is done also based on skills. So this is also the purpose of enabling people that are in need of protection, but that have education, that have certain skills, experience to use that. So of course, in that sense, this is relevant. But certainly not for vulnerable people that are coming through a purely, I would say, protection pathway. The integration is something that has to happen afterwards, thanks to all the tools and the elements that are put at disposal of the person, and the community sponsorship. As I said, it's probably one of the best way, if not the best way, to ensure that. For the COVID impact, well, I think we have recommended, we have given guidance in 2020 about this, not 2021, about this, and EASO has also worked a lot with the member states, because of course they also have the experience in supporting member states on all asylum procedures. So there have been methods used not by all member states, because for some member states there have been security concerns that somehow limited the use of this method. But I think you put it also in your paper about Finland. I mean, other member states have entirely relied on digitalization of procedures, examining the file on paper, remote interviewing. I mean, all these things that we all use now, also for other things. So, and it has not been a problem, but I think, yes, some member states have seen this as a bit problematic in the sense that, you know, not seeing the person. For some member states, the personal interviews has been, but as I said, we had 65% of implementation of the 30,000 resettlement quota. Okay, it took more time and we extended it until 2021, but it's not bad, I would say, in terms of implementation. So I think, as Julius said, we have to see this as an opportunity, as a driver of change that can then lead to, you know, positive developments in the future. So I hope I reply. Thank you.
Many thanks. I think you did, and I know that you have to leave us now. So many thanks once again for your participation, and also for agreeing to stay for one round of questions. And we really hope to host you in the future to other events.
Thank you. Have a good discussion. And sorry, I need to leave earlier. Bye-bye. See you soon. Bye.
Goodbye. So now I think we can move to the other speakers. I mean, we had some comprehensive responses from Laura Corrado, but of course, if there is anything that you would like to add on these topics in particular, or also to react to what the others in the panel have said after you, I will start from Lina Dupont, who was the first speaker. If you have any further remarks on any of this, so ranging from other complementary pathways, such as student and labor migration, links between resettlement and migration management, and then the challenges and opportunities relating to COVID, then the floor is yours.
Well, thanks. Just to add a few topics or a few ideas and remarks to what has already been said quite comprehensively in this regard. Starting with the COVID restriction, I think it was in the chat. I think it was by you, Mr. Manikam, also the idea on the feeling that some member states tend to use COVID restriction just as an excuse for not fulfilling their pledges, which basically leads back to the question, or to my initial comments on how to further improve working together with those member states who are quite reluctant in doing anything on resettlement in this regard. And you can see that, let's say, the group of member states are somehow matching in this regard. Those who already have an interest might have had some problems when it comes to COVID restriction, like travel restrictions and so on and so forth, but they found a way of dealing with it mostly. Those who hadn't had any intention on contributing to resettlement used it then as in let's say good excuse in hyphens to not do anything on resettlement in this regard. So I think that this was the reality until now. On the other hand, I also share the view that Ms. Corrado just mentioned, that basically we all have learned a lot through digitalization means in the past 2 years, not only when it comes to, let's say, procedures and dealing with applicants and so on and so forth, but also how to use it. Let's say we've learned a lot on the advantages, but also the disadvantages, and let's say the borders of experience here in this regard. So I think this could as well also then feed into future proven resettlement policies and to make more use of digital means in this regard. When it comes to the question of integration potential as a criteria, maybe I'm a bit, not maybe, but I'm a bit hesitant here, because resettlement is meant, and I understood it, and it should be meant as a protection tool. So if you're then introducing integration as a second criteria, I would say the first and foremost still is the protection needs. If integration then might be a second criteria in order to, let's say, in order to feed into that, okay, but it should not be in any case the first part of the criteria, because it's first and foremost then the protection that is in line of question. also I'm here a bit with the same argumentation or with the same view on that. I'm a bit skeptical about resettlement as a migration management tool, because the background for resettlement is completely different than what we see when we look at our legal European acquis on migration in this regard. So I would not like to see it, because I do see the danger of replacing one by another, which might not in the end help any category in this regard. When it comes to education and legal pathways for students, I would go very much in line with what Ms. Corrada just said. I think that when it comes to students, when it comes to university exchanges and so on and so forth, there is not much controversial discussion in the parliament. We just had our, let's say, we first had an initiative report in the parliament on legal pathways. We now had the legal initiative report on legal pathways. We will be having the commission proposal on labor migration and things to improve when it comes to legal pathways. So I think that here in the parliament, although we tend to have some more tense discussion on certain topics, we all agree that legal pathways and labor migration is indeed a very good part of the asylum and migration package as a whole. Also taking a bit into consideration what was slightly touched upon by this question, also a question of sustainability in this regard when it comes to working closer together with third countries. And I think that the coming talent package, talent pool idea that we're about to discuss on European level is well feeding into that idea of getting European countries, third countries, on a level playing field when it comes to developing prospects for their citizens, but also for our economies here.
Many thanks for your replies and also for drawing all of these links between the current work of the European Parliament on different aspects within community sponsorship and resettlement. So I would now hand over to David Manicom, but before that, I would also remind that it's still possible to ask some questions for the second round. So feel free to ask them in the Q&A or to raise your hands. David, over to you.
Thank you. The questions have already been answered pretty well. I'm honored to answer a question from Naomi Alboin. It's nice to be on the same call as you, Naomi. With regard to protection safeguards in complementary pathways, I mean, this is, as I think Laura said, it's a new landscape and things are evolving, and the types of programs that are being worked on are varied. And UNHCR doesn't own them. You know, UNHCR cannot impose good protection standards on them. We can advocate for them and work closely with countries who are doing them in a responsible way. But we also don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good here. We need to greatly expand opportunities for refugees who aren't going to be resettled but have no other durable solution. I think we have a responsibility to end their second exile and to give them hope. The world knows how to move. The world knows how to match employees with employers on a vast scale across borders. There are 180 million people working legally outside their home country. The systems are big. We need to end a situation where we're spending billions of dollars to support and help refugees survive in miserable situations, to get them clean water, to get them food, to get them housed, to get them shelter, while the skills and abilities and ambitions that they have are in crying demand with employers in our societies at a time of record job vacancies in virtually every developed economy. That doesn't make any sense. It's self-defeating and misses a fabulous opportunity to use the new platforms that are being built to do that matching, create a positive narrative. Refugees who have been interviewed for work opportunities through the existing programs in Canada, Australia, and the UK call it a transformative moment in their life where after years or even decades in a refugee camp, someone wants to talk to them about their abilities, not about their needs. That's a wonderful moment for them. And if you hear a refugee talking about that moment and you don't get tears in your eyes, or you're in the wrong business. It's only to say that some programs give permanent residence and therefore security on arrival, like the program in Canada, but programs in the UK have made administrative adjustments to add protection safeguards, longer periods of transition if the initial job is lost, but clear pathways in a progressive way toward a durable solution, because individuals are being brought into job opportunities that provide them the ability to apply for indefinite leave to remain after 4 years. And as long as refugees know that, there may be some risk that they're undertaking, but it's all about refugee self-agency and refugees being able to find their path forward. There's clearly a logic there. If you're designing a program to help people who you believe to be refugees to come on a labor or education pathway, at the end of the day, once these programs are established, why would you put them through your asylum system? Why would they want to go through your asylum system? That's an incoherence. But at this point, we're building new programs, and I think we want to be ambitious in growing them. All the programs are exciting, but I think at the end of the day, the combination of platforms and community integration work that community sponsorship can represent on to provide support in a nuanced way around refugees arriving on multiple pathways is an exciting area of work. And I look forward to the result of the pilots being worked on in Italy and other countries in that regard, and the support work with community organizations such as Reset in the UK for the entrance under their labor mobility programs. I won't go on too much longer. Resettlement as a migration management tool, I think you know UNHCR's view on that. We're forcefully against it, and we also think it doesn't work. So there's that. The other question that I wanted to speak to very briefly, if I can find it again. What was the second question?
Maybe the one on COVID.
Yeah, I guess I'll leave that one. Integration as a selection element. I mean, most countries have done that to some extent for 50 years. Canada did. I mean, I was trained as a Canadian visa officer, and we were taught to look at need and integration ability as a sliding scale. UNHCR does not support that principle for good reasons. Resettlement country, I mean, classic resettlement is saving lives, people who are at immediate risk in their countries of first asylum. So introducing robust integration requirements into that program, rather than working on additional programs for other refugees, we think is unethical and is also wrong-headed. But countries can and should be looking at the best way to integrate the refugees who they are accepting, and working closely with their employer communities and their community support organizations to do a good job. There are many refugees who need resettlement who also have the ability to integrate quickly and well. There are others who will be longer-term projects, as they are for many members of our own society who aren't in the labor force for a multitude of reasons, because they have 3 young children, because they're handicapped, because they have mental health support needs. So, you know, a fully integrated approach will maximize the integration potential of all refugees. But to introduce things like, you know, work experience and language skills and so forth into resettlement is not something UNHCR can support. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Many thanks. So, Giulio, I would also leave you the opportunity to add some final remarks or to add any of your insights to the questions. And if not, I see that there are some more questions coming in for a second round.
I'm happy to answer the question on community sponsorship, but if it belongs to the second round, I'll wait for the second round as you prefer.
Well, we can also start. I'm not sure that the participants can also see it. So I can maybe read it out loud and then you can get back to that, because I feel that the 3 previous panelists have been very comprehensive. So this last question is from Andrés Salazar Abello, and he asks whether the panelists know of community sponsorship programs being further developed in member states, not only bottom up, but with member states taking the initiative and making this tool a pillar, or at least a strong complement for legal immigration pathways. And then there is also a second part, if you're able to respond. So what is the general reaction of permanent representations about the EU funding and offering general parameters for community sponsorship? So I guess this is quite technical. So in case you feel up for it, Giulio, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm happy to answer. So first of all, community sponsorship programs in general are essentially never just a bottom-up approach. They need the government buy-in and very often are initiated by the government itself. So I wouldn't qualify, there are several programs where the government is fully involved. Now I can point very easily to the UK or the German program, for instance, where actually it's the government together with civil society that has been leading in both the design and the startup and the implementation of the program. So to the first question, I would say vast majority of community sponsorship programs to date are co-led opportunities where the government and civil society have been coming together. And I would add a reflection there that one of the best advantages of community sponsorship is actually one of the few spaces where states, governments, and civil society work collaboratively on migration. At the time of polarization, that shouldn't be discounted as a very important result or subproduct of community sponsorship programs. To the second question, in terms of reactions of permanent representations, I would say this is not a permanent representations issue, really, but if the question is about states' position on community sponsorship and support for measures around community sponsorship, I would say there is a lot of positiveness and support across countries on community sponsorship in general and on financing for community sponsorship. I would flag here that having been part to several discussions, including some that have been convened by the European Asylum Support Office, I've never been hearing states having skeptical attitudes towards investing in community sponsorship. So that would be it.
Sorry. Many thanks, Giulio. And I'm not sure whether the other panelists want to add something, but again, I think this is really Giulio's daily bread. But if not, I think that we would have also a question on community sponsorship ourselves, because of course we have looked at community sponsorship and complementary pathways quite a lot in this event, but it is also true that so far on the other side, we do have some, let's say, unimpressive commitments on resettlement. So the question would be whether you see a risk that community sponsorship and complementary pathways might have to fill gaps in order to respond to situations of great needs, as for example, the one in Afghanistan. And what does this mean for the EU approach to community sponsorship, for example? So I think this is quite broad. And I don't know who would like to start, whether Giulio, you would like to continue, or whether David or Lena would also like to come in.
I just finished to speak, so I'm happy if David or Lena want to come in first, and I'll be speaking with pleasure.
So it's really about the danger of the fact that whereas resettlement is mainly state-led, and also there is a responsibility of the state, community sponsorship and other complementary pathways are more in the hands, of course, of civil society, whereas with state support. And so what are the views you have on that, and where do you see these say impacting the US approach to community sponsorship?
Well, if I may step in then, because Giulio just had, as he just said, finished his remarks on that. Here again, it's maybe a bit boring, but again, I come back to the, let's say, these two types of member states being engaged or being not engaged in this regard. When it comes to the member states who are already engaged and who have already some sort of, because community sponsorships vary a lot, not only in the question of are they applied or not, but also on how they are designed within the European Union and worldwide, if they are designed in this regard. I would say here, again, there is the slight danger of member states who are already engaged, so that they're kind of, I think, and the question was already touched upon in the previous round of question when it comes to the question of additionality. So is this kind of, let's say, member states trying to concentrate more on resettlement or doing more on community sponsorship, or are there, I think the fewest ones are doing both. So stepping out and scaling up on both levels. So there is a danger of, let's say, replacing one by another, which in the end does not help those who are in need. And I think the second, when it comes to the second group of member states who are not that willing, neither for resettlement nor for community sponsorship, I think here we are back again with the, let's say, broader dimension of asylum and migration. And let me add to that, that it's not my personal point of view. It's not that a dimension of the discussion I particularly like. But if we want to, let's say, broaden the member states, the variety of member states engaging in these topics, then we have to have this discussion. We need to lead it. Of course, also with these pragmatic, non-emotional, to the best possible extent, I would say, to lead it in this regard, in order to find solutions in the end for both resettlement and those member states who want to use community sponsorship, because it is in the end, it depends, still depends on the member states being willing and being able to do so, more than probably on a European framework asking for that, I would say.
Many thanks. So David, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I guess just a couple of reflections on the issue of the relationship between states and civil society and community sponsorship. I don't want to make traditional resettlement and community sponsorship sound too similar. I'm a strong believer in the added value of community sponsorship, but I don't think we should also exaggerate the or create a gulf between them that isn't helpful. And in democratic polities, you know, what does it mean to say it's the state's responsibility and only the state's responsibility? I mean, first of all, resettlement is a voluntary humanitarian action. It's not a treaty obligation. It's not a convention obligation. It's a humanitarian gesture, one which I firmly believe benefits the receiving societies, not just the refugees, and that community sponsorship can amplify that benefit. We don't do community sponsorship only to benefit refugees, so that's the primary goal. Certainly in Canada and in our work with GRSI, we advocate for it because we believe it creates better communities. We believe that integrating refugees through private individuals working within their communities makes those communities blossom, makes people find out that the neighbor across the street that they barely ever talk to is actually a violin teacher and would love to give violin lessons to refugee children, and then they get to know them, and so forth and so on. It's also about how every society delegates responsibilities between government and civil society differently, and that's okay. There's different models. We should be thinking about what does government, whatever that means, what does government do well, and what do civil society actors do well? If we're looking at formalized full-time language training, it's probably best for government to contract that. If we're looking at informal conversation circles to help people who are working full-time to enhance their language skills, or helping parents better understand their role in the school system, or taking kids to soccer practice or football practice, government doesn't do that very well. And perhaps civil society actors are better at it. And frankly, helping people find their first job. How many people on this call found their first job through a government employment program? You probably got it through a friend of a friend, or your uncle knew somebody, right? And that's how refugees find their first jobs too. So ultimately, it's a compact between government, a contractual agreement between government and private individuals or community associations. It's not a getting rid of government responsibility. It's every single refugee in community sponsorship program is admitted by the government, admitted to the territory by the government. Governments don't do this to save money. Whether it's a little bit cheaper in the long run, maybe, but believe me, no government takes this on to save money. Community sponsorship programs are an integrated contractual arrangement, recognizing that community actors do some things better than government does, or at least wanting to test those models. What works best for making refugees feel welcome, and what works best to make our communities welcome refugees, and the communities thereby grow in richness and diversity and inclusiveness. I'll leave it there.
So many thanks. And after this question, I'm looking at the audience to see if there is any very final question or remarks. We have a couple more minutes before concluding, so there would be still space. You can also raise your hand in case you prefer to ask the question directly. I see one hand raised. And also one question in the chat. So, okay, so now maybe we can take these two and then wrap up. So I think we can unmute Vit Novotny. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello. Thank you for the presentations. Congratulations to the authors on a really nice report. I have a question about one particular question, and that's including resettlement or not in the concept of migration management. I just want to ask a bit more about this. It seems to me like excluding resettlement from migration management would amount to excluding it from the sphere of democratic politics. So and I think that would be wrong. So if perhaps the authors or somebody else could correct my error if I'm not understanding correctly. Thank you.
Okay, and together with this question, we also have a question in the chat from Gabriela Agatiello, who asks, what are your thoughts on the growth and sustainability of community sponsorship if civil society actors are not adequately funded or resourced and naming is not yet possible in Europe? So I would ask the three of you if you want to quickly come back to both of the questions, so that's, let's say, in a final 1 to 2 minutes reply, so that then we can also finish in time. And I know that Giulio has to jump in at 4:30. So if you want to have a very final closing word, Giulio, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll be super sharp and fast on two things. First, answering to a couple of questions on community sponsorship, and then a closing remark. So just to build on what David was saying before, I really want to stress the non-dichotomy between sponsorship and resettlement. In the vast majority of member states, sponsorship supports arrival of resettled refugees and actually expands welcoming opportunities and integration potential for the refugees who are resettled under a traditional UNHCR framework. So I just want to clarify and flag that. At the same time, community sponsorship can support many other pathways, and the diversification of pathways will allow community sponsorship to thrive, because it's much easier to mobilize a student to welcome a fellow student than it may be to mobilize a student to welcome a refugee who may not be able to join him in the university, and so on and so forth. So there are big advantages in having community sponsorship sitting across pathways, including resettlement, both for the growth of the pathways and the growth of community sponsorship. The second thing I want to flag is really this question around quality of programs and professionalization and government's role. I think David put it beautifully. There are things that governments do well. There are things that civil society do well. There are things that individual citizens and communities do well. And the beauty of community sponsorship is to structure and formalize who can do best what. And I think one of the things that is the most powerful to me is that it also creates a new element of trust between government and its own citizens, who feel involved in the decisions around resettlement and refugee policy in a way that otherwise would be impossible, because they have a direct stake and agency in the space of refugee policy, something that is to be cherished if we look at our migration, at the state of our general debate about migration. And then just to close on the last question from Gabriela, resourcing and financing is a critical feature of community sponsorship in general, as for any resettlement, because in a way, there is nowhere to gain out of the system. There is no self-generating financing in the system, but I would say community sponsorship actually solves for some of the sustainability questions by itself, because in a lot of countries, sponsors are asked to crowdfund a certain amount in order to welcome refugee. And that crowdfunding is both a great opportunity for sponsors to widen the circle of welcome. There is a lot of people that are ready and wishing to welcome refugee that don't have the time to, but can contribute financially to others who have the time to. And so the circle of welcomers broadens. And at the same time, this brings in resourcing for the sponsorship programs. At the same time, at the European level, the lump sums are available. Now they're available also for the humanitarian admissions, which allows for community sponsorship self-sustainability through European financing. So I think previously we discussed together with Laura, the importance of sustained and expanded European financing for all pathways. And by default, a sponsorship is a welcoming opportunity across pathways. It will benefit from increased financing for each and every pathway that we can consider. Thanks a lot again to everyone. I'm sorry I will need to jump sharp at the point of the hour. It was a pleasure. It's a pleasure to read the report again from the EPC, and I hope to see you in person very soon.
Many thanks to you, Giulio. And of course, we will also try to close on time. So I will move right away to Lena Dupont in case you want to answer the questions or provide any closing remarks.
Well, thanks. And to put the closing remarks first, it was a pleasure of having the discussion with you, and also, of course, reading the paper and looking at different aspects of your proposal. I'm not quite sure if the question of Witnowodny was directed to the authors of this study, because I could as well then reiterate or repeat what I had said before. And to the second question on when it comes to funding, you, for good reasons, had a huge focus on that also in your paper. But I think, again, if we're looking from the, let's say, the structural needs of European funding policies and the different funding opportunities, it goes well, then again, also back to those wanting to set up something like a community sponsorship program to look for and apply for money that not only comes from the AMIF, but also probably from those who are financed as regards integration policies in this regard. So I think it needs a bit of creativity as usual when you want to work with European money. But I think it is doable also then on national level. And of course, the better connection you have with your government in this regard, and the more you're aligned on the goals of resettlement and community sponsorship, if you're aligned on that, then of course it makes it easier to have some kind of ideas or let's say working around the corners to see if we have another possibility for funding or get access to funding.
Many thanks for these closing remarks. So we'll go to the last speaker, David Manicum, for your closing remarks and answers to the questions.
Hi, Silvia. I had also noticed that there was another that Anne Hardy had wanted to get in. So, I mean, I've spoken a lot, so if I could be very, very brief. Thank you for the opportunity. It's a great report and a really good discussion. Let's be ambitious in all these areas. I mean, the European community has a much greater capacity to ramp up third country solutions of all sorts and stop thinking of reasons why we can't, and rather finding the solutions as to why we can, to reduce motivations for dangerous journeys and provide many more safe pathways. So I think I would prefer to leave it there. Giulio and Lena covered most of the points that I'd wanted to make. Thank you.
No, thanks to you, and thanks, Amin, for all of your remarks, for your recommendations, for your reflections, also on the past action. I think this has been a very, very rich and interesting debate, and I really, really thank you all for being here with us today. And we will try to close on time. So thanks also to the participants for their attendance today, and especially thanks to the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung for the very good cooperation throughout the project. And I really look forward to seeing you again to future events and possibly to discuss resettlement and community sponsorship. So thank you very much, and it was a pleasure.